Harrison Owens.
Here.
Harrison Owens is here. We have our clerk and our city manager and our city planner with us tonight. We have minutes to approve for both January and March's meetings, so I trust you have looked through those in your packets. So is there a motion to approve those minutes? Both of them? All right. Support for that? Okay. Anything that you found in there that we need to address? Okay. All in favor of approving both the January 8th and March 5 minutes? Aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. I will make a motion that we approve our agenda tonight, but we need to make one slight tweak. We have our 3 public hearings, but then under new business, we need to actually deliberate and decide on those 3 things. So if we could make new business A, B, and C to coordinate with the 3 public hearings, and then what was A becomes B, and what was B becomes E. Just going to bump those down. So I'll make that motion. Anything else anybody sees on the agenda? All in favor of approving that agenda as presented, aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. I'd like to open the floor at this time for public comments. Anything that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. Just step up to the microphone. Come on, Rose.
All right, I will. Thank you, everybody, for your hard work on these ordinances. They're just complicated, and I hope we caught all the flubs or things that we're just going to be surprised at somewhere along the line. But you guys have done a great job. Thank you.
Did you get that as a YouTube for these guys over here as well?
She tells me every day.
Okay, seeing no other public comments. Folks, any conflicts of interest or ex parte communication that you need to make the body aware of? Okay, seeing none, we will move to our public hearing. So I will open our first public hearing, which is the table of uses ordinance. And since we don't really have an applicant on these ordinances, and we've looked at these, I'm just going to ask, after if there's any public comments, but then after that we'll just ask Mr. Womack and Mr. Johnson to kind of summarize the things that we've been looking at over these last couple of months before we close that public hearing. So we'll definitely get some input from them. But we'd like to open with allowing the public that would like to share some thoughts with us on these table of uses ordinances changes.
Highlighted in yellow are our changes, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple of the other ones that put in there, yes.
There's a couple other changes, they're different colors, but I'll walk right through.
Okay, well, seeing no comments, we'll close the public hearing portion on that. So, I don't know, Mr. Womack, Mr. Johnson, I don't know if either one of you want to go through those things that are highlighted in there, those possible changes. And in your packets, folks, page 22 is where those things will start.
Yep, so if you don't mind, I'll walk through some of these. So I did try to highlight all the changes. Some of these were discussed with you previously. Some were things that you indicated you wanted to see happen, and I tried to make that happen, so you'll have to let me know if you approve of them. Previously, we had discussions about the definitions of restaurant and tavern. As you see there, the essential definition is that it's a place that holds itself out for service of food or alcohol. The difference between a restaurant and a tavern is that a restaurant primarily makes its money from food, and a tavern primarily makes its money from alcohol. So, then based on discussion that we had, I added the use as a tavern in the G2, B3, and MU districts. I also made the changes regarding tattoo and piercing parlors, as this board voted on. establishments that produce alcoholic beverages and include tours, etc., in both the B3 and industrial, yeah. And the difference between them being that in the B3, they're required to have retail sales of some kind or tours, and in the industrial, they may have. I did highlight in red on page 37, professional and business offices. So as part of my ongoing work for the zoning map, I was in contact with the owner of Display Pack, and there are two buildings located out in front of the Display Pack building. Don't have the addresses in front of me, but one is currently being used as a manufacturing building, and one is currently being used as an office. So I thought to myself, well, why are we excluding or not including professional and business offices in the industrial section? Makes no sense to me. So it would solve us a problem with the zoning map, where we could take both of those parcels, convert them to an industrial zoning, and then just add professional and business offices to the industrial section. Makes sense to me. I can't think of any good reasons not to do it. Oh, sorry, flip pages there for a second.
Page 37.
Then, same page 37 in green, you'll see the phrase allied chemicals included there. I Googled allied chemicals, it doesn't seem to have a meaning. Mr. Johnson also spoke with a biochemist friend of his who indicated that didn't seem to have much of a meaning. So I think maybe we should consider removing that. Let's see, what else did I have here? Based on discussions I've had with various members of the Planning Commission, the term sexually oriented businesses came up, and there was a question as to whether that was a required use. Just in a brief conversation I had with Mr. Johnson before this meeting, he indicated that it probably was a required thing that we had in our ordinance. Of course, I haven't had the opportunity to do the full research on this, so I guess we could leave it up to the Planning Commission what they want to do. We could remove it, potentially be sued at some distant point in the future by someone who wants to open up a sex shop, or we could leave it in, and the rules and requirements are actually fairly strict. And of course, the industrial section is not an ideal place to have any kind of shop. But that being said, we are changing some of the MU district into industrial, close to a downtown district and close to residential homes. So does the Planning Commission have any thoughts?
Like it is, they've been that way forever and it's worked, so why change it? The business is sexual oriented business that's ongoing, and the ordinances are pretty strict.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, the reason that we have to have that allowed, as an allowed use in one of our zoning districts, because the law says you have to allow for all legal land uses, and that is a legal land use. So, Cedar Springs, as well as virtually every other community in Michigan, makes it as hard as possible for these types of businesses to get established. You can't squeeze them out just by virtue of location standards and that sort of thing. There has to be at least one spot in town where you could approve it. That doesn't mean you have to approve it, because it's a special land use. So if they don't meet your standards, and those standards are discretionary, you may still turn it down. But it is a legal land use, and you should allow for it somewhere in your zoning ordinance.
And then the last thing I have is, in the HC district, subpart O, hotel and motel, there's discussion about accessory uses for a hotel or motel. It's my understanding that the hotel that is planned for the city of Cedar Springs would like to at some point have a tavern inside of it. And strictly speaking, that isn't technically allowed under the way this ordinance is written. So Mr. Johnson indicated that we should consider, if the Planning Commission would like to add certain language to that subpart. I don't have it in front of me. Do you have it in front of
I
you?
do have it, yeah. You could change that to say hotels and motels, including accessory uses such as restaurants, taverns, conference rooms, exercise rooms, swimming pools, and banquet facilities. Which are commonly, they wouldn't be there but for the hotel. And so they would disclose that to you when they came in as part of an accessory use could allow that as a special use. Right now, it's set up as a permitted use. And then if they came in with a hotel, just like the one that we approved up on White Creek Avenue, they would tell you what's gonna be in there. You never think to ask, do you have an exercise room? You just accept it, or a conference room, you just accept it.
And the point being is that tavern is not included as a permitted use in the HC district. Based on my conversations with members, it's my understanding that it was not something that they wanted to see as a strictly permitted use as just a tavern, but that they would be okay with the tavern being an accessory use to something else. But it's open for your discussion if you'd like to tell me what you want.
So then, would we leave hotel motel under the permitted uses, but then add under the special land uses, hotel motel with that wording that you just had?
Yes.
So then do we have to qualify something on the one above hotel motel without a tavern, or?
No, it just says they're permitted, if they choose to bring it in as part of the accessory use of a permitted principal use, which is the
Okay.
hotel, then they could have the restaurant or tavern or exercise room without any additional approvals from the planning commission. It's just considered accessory to the main use.
Okay. So we'll leave it as it is and just adding the one in the special land use.
Right.
And would this body want hotel, motel with tavern, et cetera, to be a special land use or a permitted use?
I think special.
Yeah. Special. Okay, that's kind of typical. I think there may be other references to hotels and motels, or maybe, I think in the B2 zone. That's a permitted, I think that's a special use in the B2 zone. We may want to have the same language carried over.
You said in the B2?
Yes.
That was bed and breakfast, wasn't it?
No, it's actually in the, it is in the B2, as a special use permit.
29?
Just for consistency, we probably want to make that, have that same language.
Letter on. So then that would be the same language as under highway commercial.
Right.
Okay.
And then the special uses allowed in B3 are the same as allowed in B2, so hotels would be allowed in all three of those zoning districts.
And we would add in I that the tavern or an exercise room would be a special use.
All that would be a special use. Simply a hotel, whether they had those extra things or not, would still be a special use. So that would mean a hotel that has been approved out in White Creek Avenue does not have a special use permit. So they would be a non-conforming use.
So they could come back and get a special.
Yeah, if they ever wanted to expand, for instance, they would have to come in and get a special use permit.
I think they already include a small bar and a restaurant, small restaurant and an exercise room and conference room in it,
Probably.
and that was approved.
Yeah.
And I believe that's all the notes I had for B2.
Great. County Commissioners, any questions that you have on these ordinance changes before we move on? Okay. All right, so we will open our second public hearing of the evening, letter B in your agenda here, principal uses on a lot ordinance, page 40 in your packet. If you want to check the material there, so we will open that for any comments from the public. All right, seeing none, we will close that public hearing. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Womack, anything you want to point out on that?
No, other than the fact that I know businesses want to maximize as much profit as they can on piece of property, but it does cause problems for the city sometimes, and this is a good way to prevent some of those problems.
Councilors, any, questions for me? Okay. All right, and our third public hearing, the letter C. We'll open that public hearing for parking standards ordinance, page 42 in your packet. So, open that for any public comments. Seeing none, we'll close that public hearing. Mr. Womack, anything to add on that?
Yeah, Mr. Johnson did send me some very, very minor changes. I see I didn't highlight it here. I think I was adding the word shall or something to that effect.
Yeah, I'm not sure when I did that, but, if Mike says I did it, then I did it.
It didn't change the meaning of anything, it was just I botched a word. So it doesn't change the meaning of anything.
Any questions?
Says here, we had a discussion that an outlaw could be, crushed concrete or crushed recycled blacktop. Off-street parking shall be dust resurfaced using employees parking in the area loading. It doesn't say, what the surface, because we had talked, not limited.
Under 0.3%,
Yeah.
it says, shall not be limited to gravel or crushed stone or crushed concrete. So it says it may include these, but not be limited to those, as long as they're, so we give 3 examples, but simply, there could be other things that could also work. Am I good if I interpret that correctly?
Yeah, you are.
That's on the cross.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. So, let's move to new business. So, item A then is for us to discuss and decide on that table of uses ordinances. What we'd be looking at doing tonight is making a recommendation to City Council for passage of this. So, what is your pleasure? What would you like to do?
I move that we adopt all the changes that we mentioned and recommend to city council.
Okay. All right. We have motion support to recommend this to City Council. Any further discussion on it? Okay. All in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. And then letter B, principal uses on the lot ordinance. Again, we need to send that to City Council with our recommendation. So what you have to do with that?
Motion that we send that.
Okay. For support for that? Any comments or discussion?
Ms. Carolyn, yes, I believe the motion, if that was meant, should recommend the ordinance, not just send it to the city council.
Are you good with that?
Yes.
Just changing the wording.
Correct.
You good, you still second? All right. No comments, all right, so all in favor of that motion of recommending that to City Council, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no? Motion carries, thank you. All right, and then our final public hearing, the parking standards ordinance, again, looking to send that to City Council for their passage there. I'll make a motion that we recommend that to City Council. Support. Any questions? Comments on that? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, if you turn your attention to, it starts at page 45 in your packet, we have some preliminary thoughts on a site plan that we're going to look at tonight. So, Mr. Johnson, why don't you walk us through your report that you have prepared?
I'd be glad to do that. Would we prefer to have the applicant make a presentation first?
No, why don't you just tell us a little bit, first of all, what you got there, and then we'll
Okay.
give them a chance to respond.
Well, we received an application to construct a 10,825 square foot building to replace the fenced storage area within the parking lot at the Tractor Supply Store on 17 Mile Road and White Creek Avenue. As part of the store, they also are proposing one of the suites to have a drive-through window, and so that would require a special use permit. Part of your action tonight could be to set the public hearing for the site plan and special use permit. Tonight, we're just taking a preliminary look at the site plan. So, provided you with some comments on the site plan. The parcel in question is part of two lots, and I had a question about it would be better for planning and zoning purposes to have all on one lot, which means the proposed building and the Tractor Supply Store should all be on one lot. It just makes it easier for assessing, for administration, for any future lot splits. Even though it's owned by the same person, it's better to avoid confusion, and mischief could happen, I found, if you have a lot line going through a building. It just doesn't work out well. So that'd be the first thing for the applicant to discuss tonight. We have a number of comments that just simply go with our site plan requirements to show uses and building outline on adjacent parcels. We require that parking lots and landscape islands be bordered with a raised or rolled concrete curb. They need to show that. Item number 4 goes to the parking standards. And I found out I had a sheet included in my packet that was not part of the official submission that you had. So Mr. Alsbach and I cleared that up tonight. The sheet I had showed a 7,700 square foot addition onto the small building next to Tractor Supply Store.
I'll expand on that too.
And it's not supposed to be there. So in any event, they have enough parking. And we'll make sure that the parking calculations on the final version are correct on the site plan. They do show a sidewalk leading from 17 Mile Road to the building, retail building. That should be concrete with a width of 5 feet. The ordinance requires a sidewalk be constructed along White Creek Avenue right-of-way, but the ordinance also allows that requirement to be waived by separate appeal to the City Council, so the applicant may intend to do that. We want them to show any utility or access easements. Landscape requirements do meet our new ordinance. There is a painted island coming in from White Creek Avenue that separates the proposed retail parking lot from the access island in front of Tractor Supply Store. We would like that to be a curved island for better traffic control coming in from that way. Protects the parking area there and provides better traffic direction in and out of that area, so it's not just kind of free-for-all. People might tend to drive over that painted area, whereas if it's concrete curb, they're not going to. So it just better directs traffic flow. We also asked for a curb parking island at the south end of the parking row in the middle of the parking lot, that be curved. Provides a little more direction within the parking lot and another space for some landscaping. And then we also require that parking islands be 2 feet shorter than the adjacent parking space. They should show that dimension. There's another number of comments on lighting. I will ask the applicant to address those separately. And then any signage, so folks don't go the wrong way on the exit driveway, drive-through aisle. Waste containers comply with the ordinance requirements, and we're looking for comments from our city engineer, which I don't think we have yet. We don't get those. So those are my comments. Any questions that you may have? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so why don't you, we'll let you respond to some of those things. And
Tim Alsbach of TJA Architecture, representing Jonah Properties. I'm the architect on the project. I guess my limits are on the building itself. They used an engineer out of Detroit area as far as all of Tim's comments, certainly they're gonna work towards, meeting all those, comments and, being corrected on the plan. The 7,700 square foot addition that Tim referred to, where they came from, and I noticed it really was on the, photometrics plan, and they had, done some preliminary work on some other options on this whole site. And somehow he used that base plan to do his photometrics on it, and that's where that showed up. So that'll be taken off on the final plan, that they're not doing any additions on that main tractor building. They're okay with putting the properties together. Just going down the list, everything is there. I did have a question. I drove by the site today, and I had earlier, but the sidewalk that's along 17-Mile Road appears to be gravel. And I don't know, there was no comment on changing that to full concrete. I mean, you referred to one that came from that. It looks to be about 3 feet wide. I don't want any surprises in the end, so I don't know what wants to happen there, but thought I'd bring it to your attention.
It's a very narrow sidewalk that really kind of hugs the curb. So whether there's room for a full-fledged 5-foot wide sidewalk, that would be the preference to replace that. I'm not sure how that sidewalk got there, but this is an opportunity for the planning commission to try to correct that situation.
It'd be nice to know if the applicant intends to request a waiver as well.
Well, I think they will on White Creek, because, properties on the west side of the street don't have any, and they'll probably go through that motion. I think, in my opinion, I have to talk to the owner of that, but replacing that on 17-Mile would make sense. So I just want to clear that up, that I did see that in a review, but thought we ought to discuss it. So we talked about number 6 on the abatement, I'll probably follow that. All the other items going right down the list. On the lighting, we will coordinate what they will have on the building, which would all be shielded lights. There'll probably something over the drive-through area, and then under the canopies, but there'll be some security lighting. So we'll coordinate that with the photometric plan. All the other items on here we'll comply with. And the signage, again, we'll just make sure that we're directing drivers to the drive-through and to the front of the buildings. We'll wait for the city engineer's report and comply with what he's looking for. So we respectfully ask that we could get this put on the agenda for public hearing as soon as possible. There was no comments on the architecture, so I don't know if there's any thoughts there.
Well, I'm something to see. Anybody have any questions while we have this all talk here?
Yeah. On the west exposure there, the brick facing White Creek, I see potential there for banners and signs, and that's not be allowed, correct?
Well, I don't know what the, typically again, signage ordinance is done by a sign company. They'll come in and meet your ordinance.
Well, we always get, the signage on the front, but then all of a sudden you see this banner pops up, and
Sure.
it's a continuing issue on some of these, facing the expressway in particular, and then this one, a high traffic road, and that would be very up front.
Sure.
And then two, this firm, the same company, owns the access road between Burger King and Independent Bank. We seem to have an ongoing problem with them maintaining that.
Okay.
It's some major holes in it. I know that's not you, but
Something that they
this
need
is
to
a whole
address.
different site.
Sure.
And that's always been a lot of potholes there.
Okay.
Actually, the same piece of property too.
It is.
While I'm not a member of the planning commission, one thing I did notice is you've got a lot of wood tone and red brick tone in front of a building that is a sheen white. I didn't know if that would cause visual conflict.
Between your building, the existing building, and the new building, there's a lot of, it looks nice.
You were trying to compliment what A&W has.
Yeah.
I think,
Of course, my wife would tell me I can't even dress myself with colors appropriately, so
Maybe
my word is
across the road.
what it's worth.
yeah.
And so it's,
I thought it looked nice.
it does, look very nice. Very nice.
So you think that you'll have everything that you need for them to prepare, that we can get
Yeah.
the public hearing?
Yeah, I think so. by?
Well,
Meeting's the 14th.
right.
We generally require at least 1 week ahead of time, so
Okay.
we can get it to them 1 week ahead of time.
Okay, it should be in the office on the date the application comes, the notice comes out in the newspaper, because it's a public hearing, so that would be somewhere around April 22nd.
Okay. I'll put them on notice.
While you're standing there, if you don't mind, well, I agreed with everything the planner had to say. You guys saw, obviously, in my manager's report, most of the exact same language. One thing I don't think the planner mentioned was the parking area being physically separated from the loading zone area. If you look at the map, there is a loading zone
The back of the building?
on the north side of the building. Trying to find it. And you have a dumpster, what looks like, with a 24 by 60 loading zone in front of it. And I can't tell, but it doesn't look like there's any kind of physical barrier between that and the parking zone to the east. I'm a little concerned that you might have some cross-traffic issues from people coming off White Creek Avenue, making a right-hand turn into the drive-through. And then people coming through that parking area, making a left-hand turn through the loading zone into the drive-through. So I didn't know if this body wanted to consider requiring a physical separation there, or if the,
Is that loading zone set up for the trash trucks to do the dumpsters?
Correct.
So they wouldn't only be in there once a week?
well, yeah, but I'm not worried about that making back in there. My concern is about citizens driving through that parking area and then making a left-hand turn after exiting the loading zone. So I don't know if this body wants the parking zone separated physically from the loading zone, and whether the applicant has an issue with that.
Yeah, again, I'm speaking for the site civil engineer who would have done this. At this point, depending on how many stacking cars and depending on what type of to go, because if it's a Wendy's or a McDonald's, they certainly have more cars than a Big Coffee or something, I don't know. They don't have any specific person for this supposedly restaurant, whatever that may be defined as, that I could see someone coming off of White Creek and at this and North Tenant would want capability of coming in to that space. I don't see a conflict unless there was enough cars, backing up at the time, say at noon time or whatever.
I could also see people trying to make a right-hand turn and then an immediate left onto White Creek. That could cause problems too, but maybe I'm just cynical of human nature. That can be a dangerous parking lot to go through.
No, I haven't only gotten records yet.
I think if that painted island becomes a physical barrier on the north, that would probably help a lot.
Yeah.
I think they can agree to that. No one's gonna cut right through that striped area then.
The key, utility to be determined. Water and sewer lays on the west side of White Creek.
Yeah. So they have notes on here,
Yeah, I read that.
okay.
There's also water in that parking lot at a fire hydrant, I think. But I think it's about the same distance whether they bore under. But you're right, there's no sewer to the immediate east. So the sewer would either have to go to the south or to the west.
Yeah, they call out for a 6-inch directional bore underneath White Creek
Yeah.
to about the center of the building.
Makes sense.
The same thing with that 2-inch copper water.
That's stuff on down the road. Master meter, 1 2-inch meter, and the rest would be divvied up to under their jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think typically on something like a project like this, they would, their rent would be based on usage. Individually metered. You get into a restaurant that maybe use a lot of water, may change some things, but.
Also, I would note that I really like the landscaping plan. It's a good shape. So whoever did that, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Mossbach? Thank you. All right, so we'll aim for that, public hearing on 14th, as long as you can meet the deadlines, get that stuff done, so, right? That would be great. Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on the share. All right. In terms of what is now letter E, and our new business, memo on waste receptacles, commonly referred to as dumpsters. So, Mike, I believe you wrote this, so you can walk us through this.
Riveting stuff, this is. So this is one of the things I've wanted to address for a long time, and Mr. Drummer agreed with me, so thank you, appreciate the kick in the butt. So one of the complaints I've heard from businesses on a regular basis is that our current ordinance requires decorative concrete or brick, which can be a fairly expensive thing to use for a dumpster enclosure. So doing research, I found that a lot of other communities allow other things, pretty much anything that you can make a fence out of, they allow for a dumpster enclosure. I personally don't like chain link fencing, whether it has the privacy slats or not. Of course, that's up to you guys, which you want your community to look like, but I would recommend against allowing that. I did make some other minor changes based on some of the dumpster enclosures I see around. I'd like to see the sides of the dumpster enclosure, if they're not actually touching the base of the ground, that they'd be within 2 inches on the sides and 4 inches in the front. Because oftentimes what happens is the garbage gets out of the dumpster, gets into the enclosure, and then is blown away. So that 2 inch or 4 inch requirement would prevent things from blowing out of the dumpster enclosure.
Have to have room for the vermin to come in and out.
I've seen rats squeeze through tiny, tiny holes. That's not going to prevent them. Similar to our fence ordinance, I would request that the decorative side be on the outside, which is logical, but, you know, requirement is nice. The fence ordinance also has language in there about upkeep, which the dumpster enclosure ordinance is not currently. And I would like specific language in there. And while we do have this language in a convoluted sense, specific language within this ordinance itself that says anytime a site plan comes up that we can address the dumpster enclosure. Just because I think we've got a lot of times where we have a sketch plan and they want to do something, but they've got this ugly dumpster sitting there that they don't want to enclose. So I have the draft ordinance starting at page 70, it looks like. 71, and I'm open for any thoughts, comments, or questions. The changed parts are in bold, so I simply added on to for the most part. Didn't change much of it.
I agree with the prohibiting the chain link with those slats, and it looks horrible. And they get broken, and yeah, they're ugly.
I would also like to see language in there about upkeep of the fencing, especially if we're going to allow other materials outside of the concrete. I think that we need to make sure they're upkeeping that.
I think I did add that language.
Yeah.
Yep, subpart K. Shall be kept neatly finished, including all metal parts and supports that are not galvanized, etc., etc.
So, this requires a public hearing as well, right? For
Yeah, you know, to be honest, I don't know where I got the time to do this week. I wasn't planning on doing the whole thing, but I just sat down and it happened. So I'll bring it back to you at your next meeting for, I guess, final approval, and we can set a public hearing.
Just one comment, I've seen, one community I worked in required, steel posts or bollards at the rear of the.
Yeah, so when they put it back in, it doesn't hit the fence.
Yeah.
They don't blow up there.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to put that in if the board is okay with that.
Good idea.
other thoughts on this? So we'll see another finalized version of this.
Would we allow ballards on the entrance also? Allow them to put it in, the ballards on the entrance also? Not require, but
Yeah.
their option. That would be-
Yeah, they kind of protects the corners when we shove it back in.
I mean, if it's outside of that, that would be acceptable.
So do you mean on the, kind of the edges, so it doesn't hit the sides?
So it would be that you have the wall here, the ballards would be on the outside of the wall. So if they run in there with a truck, they would hit that first instead of the wall and knock it over.
Kind of defeats the purpose of making it look nice with nice
Well,
materials.
but it does, because if they hit that first and not the wall,
True enough.
they'll have to,
Then we'd have to fix it.
yeah, very true.
Right, because that's the
That's
ordinance,
Yeah,
right?
I think they would look kind of ugly out front.
Well, just so we get it clear now, instead of somebody sticks them in there and then, no, you can't have them. Just a thought.
Would you like language that recommends bollards in the front? I mean, it's worthless language, but maybe something
I
like,
would say it's their option, if they wanna put it in there, let them worry about it, if they don't, they don't. It looks nice. They put them in and it's like, okay. It's at their cost and their,
seem like you have something to say.
Allendale Township, I can send you that ordinance.
Oh,
It's very, very specific.
sorry, I just know what he means by very specific.
Allendale,
Allendale Township, they have a very detailed waste container ordinance because one of the persons on the planning commission worked for a truck disposal firm, so he knew the damage they could do to them, so.
oh yeah,
So,
they can wreck them pretty
Yeah.
easy.
And then it would be a fight for the city to get them to fix it, right?
It's a fight for the city to get them to do anything, but
You know,
we try.
you're looking at 6 months to get them the problem to fix it after they've wrecked it, but if they put a ballard up there, and it's like they wrecked the container and they can replace that quick.
It's $10. Well, it don't have to be intrusive, but it's specific.
Sure. Okay. Exactly what I said.
Mr. Conley has something you might want to show me after the meeting?
Sure, I'll leave it out on the computer here, so it's just an example of some tastefully done bollards in our assumption culture. They don't really attract the vision for the overall look aesthetics. There we go. I used up all my words earlier today in class.
All right, so, we'll see that again next month, and then we can set a public hearing on it. All right, so under old business, remember last month, we pointed out, through that whole list, all the little sticky notes there on the map, we're almost done with that, we still have there's a couple left that we have to deal with. Mr. Womack or Mr. Johnson, whichever one of you would like to go through those couple that we need to still address.
Well, I only have 3, I think that's all we have. Okay. So I've been in contact with a couple of business owners and landowners recently. 550 West and 660 West, formerly known as, are both owned by the same people who own DisplayPack. And they indicated to me that one of those is currently being used as a manufacturing facility and is set up for such. So that would be an appropriate designation for industrial. And then based on this body's recommendation that professional and business offices be added to industrial, the other building is currently being used as a ministerial office. So the owner of DisplayPack indicated to me it was set up that way. He expected it to be used as an office building into the future, and I can't think of any good reasons not to allow it. So I would recommend that we change both of those to an industrial zoning district, which matches with all the properties surrounding it. I've also been in contact with the owner of 199 South Street. This is the property to the immediate west of the car wash, which is still pink. And his indication to me was that he did at some point plan on expanding the car wash. He had zero interest in having an R2 parcel for residential use. And he would ask that this body change his B1 lot to a B3 lot so that he could use it for the car wash purposes in the future.
Those make sense. Anybody got any? I think the recommendations that the city manager given are good. Yes. Yeah, okay.
Are you gonna take, the B1 just off the list completely once you do that? Because we don't have any need for the B1 since we don't use it, and, I mean, is it still gonna stay like in the legend, or?
I don't see why we would, unless you can think of a reason why we should
We should what?
keep it in the legend.
Okay, no, I was just making sure. So that's gonna leave, we just won't have a B1 anymore.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay.
Or an RR for that matter.
Right. Okay.
I had a question, in going through in our packet, there's all of the little sticky notes that we went through. A couple of them are still labeled next to it, not approved. Are those things that we still need to address?
I may have copied and pasted from before the last meeting.
Okay, because, I mean, there's,
Because
most of them are approved, and there's still just a few in there that are tagged not
Yeah.
approved.
These were the only three that I had notes indicating we had to address.
Okay.
My understanding, and based on this map, it looks like we've already addressed every other one that we had. And this map meets up with my understanding.
Like, just, like starting at page 13 in the packet, there's two of them in there, so if you want to just take a look at that real quick and just make sure that we're not missing anything since we're here, we'll address them if we need to.
You know, now that I'm looking at it, Church Street and Fifth Street is an orange area, which I'm guessing is probably the new R2. So is surrounding, looks like two homes that are, looks like R1. Now, those are both single-family residences, I believe. And I don't know where the discrepancy is there.
I thought when you put not approved, it was, that we decided to go with what this, Mr. Johnson recommended.
Not approved would mean that there was no action taken on it. That change, the recommended change for R2 on the first page is not approved, so it says here, we might consider making this an R2 district. You guys did not want to make that an R2 district, so it did not change.
Is that specifically in reference to these two parcels I'm referring to?
Comment number 1, correct, Mr.
Yeah.
Allen?
Yeah.
They did not want to make the change to an R2 district.
I think that was on the far north, up by Prairie Run North.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the things, you weren't still waiting for, like, us to, act on something or give you input. So,
I don't think so. The changes that were made were based off these comments, so nothing was done with comment 1, same with comment 2, and that's reflected in the map.
Gotcha, good, thank you.
So with the three changes that this body seems to have approved just now, I am just a little concerned about those two parcels that are R1 surrounded by R2 at Church and Fifth.
Can't see any reason why those two would be different than the other ones around them.
Yeah, me neither.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was our error, or if it was an error of the person who put the map together, Regis, is it Regis? But now's a good time for the body to address whether they want to. Now, R2 would allow those to be duplexes at some point in the future, but they're both currently single-family residences.
Only one of them was really realistically large enough to be considered a duplex. I was
So I guess my question is, does this body want to keep those as represented as R1, or would they like to have those switched to the R2 which surrounds it?
I would say R2.
Yeah, I'd say
I'd
R2.
say R2.
The rest of the areas.
Right.
I just want to pull up our current map. See if it has any enlightenment in it. Our 2007 map. Yeah, it's all R2 in there.
Even the two parcels in question on this map. The one on the corner of Church and Fifth and Beach.
See, the problem is that the original map doesn't have the White Pine Trail on it, the 2007 map. So it's just a little hard to tell. It might be mixed use district, but it's either mixed use district or R2. R1. That might be wrong. I mean, it makes sense for me to be R2. It doesn't really change a whole lot. Just be aware that those two properties could, along with every other property there, become duplex at some point in the future.
Okay, so R2, is that what are we all in agreement on that? Okay. Yeah. All right. So any of the other ones that are labeled on there not approved, are those not going to have to address?
I don't believe so. Just, I haven't reviewed every single note, but looking at the map, I believe it's accurate.
Okay. Good. That means we're pretty much done with that, right?
I believe we have to set a public hearing.
Right. Can we do that in time for the May? I don't know if Rick, do we have to have Regis like fully update the map before we can do the public hearing?
We can do that relatively quickly.
Okay.
I can get it to him tomorrow, and he could probably have it to me by the end of the week.
Oh, okay. So May 14th, we can do a public hearing on that? Let's do it.
Did you say May 5th is the next meeting?
14th. All right. Okay, good. So, turn your attention to number 11 on our agenda, correspondence. Sidewalk waiver, Mr. Womack, anything you want to weigh in on with that?
No, other than the fact that at some point in the future, we're going to need to start connecting all the dots with sidewalks. And I know the city council thinks about these things, and they weigh their options when these waivers come up. But at some point, we're going to require everybody up and down that area to get a sidewalk, especially since I think people who are staying at the hotel are going to want a nice paved path to walk on going down to 17 Mile Road.
Okay. And then, minor change to the site plan for the hotel, it's all set. And then, page 77, you see a memo in there from the city manager. Those were some of the things that we had talked about that we want to try to work on in 2019. As we have time to get to them, just like we've been kind of going through, some of the work that we finalized tonight with, these public hearings. This is, the next, stuff that we keep plugging away on. So you will you will see those again. And again and again. And, Mr. McGrath had I think asked a question last month about trying to find the videos, so Rebecca gave us some links, page 78 in your packet where you could find the video for the meetings. So tell your friends, because I'm sure they want to check that out. All right, planning commission members, any comments from you all?
I had a question about the sidewalk waiver. When would do we have any language in place on when we would start requiring them to have a sidewalk? Should we give them this waiver request?
No, so the way I've been addressing it with the applicants, since it's not a planning commission thing, it's a city council thing, is, and of course, thankfully the city council agrees with me on this, is that if the sidewalk meets either of their borders, that they would then extend it at that point. Now, our ordinances also give the city council the authority to force them to do a sidewalk at any point. So what might end up happening is the city council might very well just tell everybody, you now have to put a sidewalk in, period. Whether a sidewalk has met their border or not. So, yes, there is language to do that. No, there is not a time frame for it. Of course, no one will ever want to do it, but it'll happen eventually.
Okay.
There'll be something, I think a little bit more development out there will trigger everyone will be required to have sidewalk, no matter what.
One of the issues we currently have is that there is township property still between where the hotel's going and where 17 Mile is.
You can't make the township put that in.
Okay.
Ask them nicely.
Well, okay.
Any other comments? The rest of I want to say thanks for, tonight, like these public hearings that we had were the culmination of a lot of months of work. So, Mr. Womack, Mr. Johnson, were digging through all kinds of definitions and taking the feedback, and so now, those have been passed on to city council. You'll be a part of city history. All your hard work that you put in, and nobody will know that you did it. But so I want to publicly thank you for all the time and effort, and especially, I wanted to say thanks for your real consistent attendance. We've had real good attendance over the last several months, so that means everybody's getting a chance to weigh in on this, and you're not having people that were gone for a month and they're, so what did you talk about last month? Everybody's staying up to date, so kudos for bringing a couple of those things to completion, and now we got a memo with some new ones coming up that we're going to be working on later this year, so we'll dive back in. So thanks for doing that. Mr. Hall, you got any updates from the city council you want to pass along to us?
Our action tonight just lengthened our meeting probably by an hour. Tomorrow night or Thursday night, but, we're moving in a good direction. We're growing, we're attracting, and businesses are coming in, so we must be doing something right here. So, thank you all, and it's a team effort.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Johnson, you got anything else for us?
No.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn? Support. All in favor, aye? Aye. All opposed, no? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Only an hour.
1 hour on the nose.
What you guys done?